Hello there, Year 11. Welcome to another lesson with yours truly. Now you may be wondering why I'm wearing this bad boy. It is because we are studying the Amish culture today. Now the Amish culture are a culture that live in America and they wear similar hats to this. So I thought, let's make it a bit interesting and fun, shall we? So without further ado, dot point today is students gain an understanding of the social and cultural world through a study from Australia or overseas. So I've chosen the Amish culture. They have to be a cultural group that is different from the student's own. Now I'm assuming no one here is from Amish cultural backgrounds. If you are, please let me know, but I don't think you are. And we've got to look at it in relation to two of the following. So like I said in the HSC, they always chuck in some concepts with the dot point. And so we've got gender, identity, roles and status, conflict, cooperation, power, authority, influence and decision making here. So a few concepts there, but we only have to pick two of the following. Now we're going to do three because, we're amazing. Anyway, so once you've highlighted that, lesson 9, go to page 34 and we'll get started. Here we go. So our focus study for this topic in society and culture, there's always a focus study with every core topic we do. And this is our first one, the Amish culture. Beauty. Look at them in their little horse and carriage there. So, before we start, whenever we do a cross-cultural comparison, there are some rules we need to follow, and you got to obey the rules. So, when we are comparing our culture, our Western Australian culture, to another culture, we need to consider how their lives are similar or different to ours. Now, we're not, and this leads into the second point, we're not going to make a judgment on whether their experiences are worse or better than ours. So I'd highlight especially that second point. We might think to ourselves, and it's kind of, I'm not saying anyone's perfect. I'll probably slip up in this video sometimes saying it, but if you go, oh, that's weird, or that's strange, that's wrong, that's right. So we want to try avoid making value judgments wherever possible. So instead of saying, oh, it's weird, we go, oh, that's a bit different. But even then, you could, associate the connotations in my voice there. But we're considering essentially how they're similar and different to us. We're going to not have a value judgment based on their culture. Okay. With that being said, we need to avoid ethnocentrism. Now, this is a brand spanking fancy new word you've probably never heard before. If we break it down, there are kind of two words here: ethno, which is Greek for ethnic, and then centrism, which is like a way of saying central, or like tunnel. Think tunnel vision, central, it's in the middle. So if we put these words together, ethnocentric, we get this idea of having tunnel vision on one ethnicity and one way of being. So ethnocentrism, if you want to right above here, draw a little arrow, is viewing something through your cultural lens only. Okay, so having a point of view or a perspective on another culture, but it's all about your tunnel vision. You're not acknowledging that people might do things differently. You're saying that's weird and wrong because in Western culture we do it this way. So for example, if I was to be ethnocentric of religious ideology or something, say in Western culture, Christianity is the most popular form of religious belief. And so if I was being ethnocentric, I would not acknowledge that there are other religious belief systems out there or anything like that. Or it might be rules about certain cultural norms or values or parties. If I'm being ethnocentric, I'm having tunnel vision about my culture and I'm seeing everything through the lens of my own culture and I'm making judgments about it based on my culture. Right? And here, I've just written the definition of it after all that big talk. Can you believe it? So the belief that one's own group or culture is superior to all other groups or cultures. So in other words, I want you guys to be socially and culturally literate, essentially just recognizing there are other ways of being than our own. Another thing we're going to do is avoid generalizations, so broad conclusions that cover information about the majority of a group rather than detailing specific variations within groups. Now, we may make some for the purpose of our studies, but I guess the generalizations are often in line with the lens of ethnocentrism, so we don't want to be making generalizations based off judgments. Okay, we can make generalizations based off what we see occurs in most cultures, and of course we can do that, and that's fine, but it's when we start doing it through that lens of my way is the highway that it becomes a bad thing. So with that being said, our generalizations will be valuable for the purpose of broad comparisons like we're going to do. So later on we're going to be broadly comparing Amish culture to Western culture. But we just got to realize that these conclusions don't apply to absolutely everyone. Okay? Beauty. So you might see already some interesting pictures here. See, this is where I got the hat idea from. These two fellas here, Jack and Jill. And they've got differently shaped facial hair than most Western people have. They shave the goatee area but leave the strapping beard, as you could say. I can't grow facial hair very well, so I don't know what that's like. And then we can see the women here, all dressed very similarly in the bluish black, so kind of dullish coloured blues and blacks there, and the males are in similar clothing, and they've all got the same headgear on, as do the males. So interesting, right? We'll learn a bit more about that. So what I want you to do is get your highlighters out. We'll go through these points, and I'm expecting you guys to annotate and highlight and note anything on the side. So, Amish people, who are they, essentially? So the Amish people are direct descendants of the Anabaptists of 16th century Europe. So I'd be highlighting Anabaptists. So Anabaptism is a religion that came from 16th century Europe. So at that time, people were changing their ideas about religion, and the religion that they're referring to is Christianity. And they got the name Anabaptists as a nickname that meant rebaptizer. So because this group rejected the idea of infant baptism. So for those who aren't aware, baptism is a Christian religious practice where you plunge into water, and then when you come out of the water, it's sort of like a public declaration that you are declaring to everyone that you're a Christian and that you will follow God and Jesus as part of your Christian beliefs, right? So a lot of people, especially 16th century Europe, the idea is once you were baptized, you were kind of cleansed of your sin, or you had approval in God's eyes. And so the idea that a lot of people would then baptize their children as kind of like a safety net, I guess. But these guys argued that an infant doesn't have knowledge of good and evil, so therefore it can't sin. So they didn't want to baptize their children. They wanted their children to be baptized of their own choice and accord when they're ready. Now the Anabaptists said, whoa, conflict. And they didn't agree with that, and because religious powers back then were had a lot more authority than they do today, they were seen as a threat to Europe's religious and social institutions, and so they were persecuted after that. So persecuted meaning that essentially, similar to how people of colour have been persecuted for years, persecuted is that idea that people don't approve of you in society, and therefore they're trying to, I guess, chase you down and meander you about technicalities and things like that. So once they were persecuted, they were fled, they were chased after, people didn't approve of them, and so what they did was they emigrated. So they migrated from one continent to another, emigrated, and they found refuge in America, and then they changed their name to Amish people so that they could again avoid that persecution and unfair targeting of their people. And they ended up moving, so these are all the states of America. They ended up just slotting, if you look here, just around the northeastern parts of America. So where MD, DE, NJ, CT, RI, etc. All those are places that the Amish people are commonly found. And they've lived there ever since, so about 400 or 500 years now. So yeah, in a nutshell, they didn't want to baptize their babies, so they got persecuted from Europe and moved to America. Pretty much sums it up. What I want you guys to do now is create some concept cards on these 4 key terms. Now, I'm just going to be using them a lot this week as we're studying the Amish people, and you'll be coming across them a lot. So it's really important that we understand their meaning. So, and these are all Amish words. So when an Amish person refers to the English, they pretty much mean anyone that is not part of their order. So if you're not an Amish person, they will refer to you as the English. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are English speaking, although most likely you are because you're in America. But essentially, if you're not Amish, they call you the English or an English person. And that's it. This word here, I want you to have a go at pronouncing it first before I do. So pause this, have a go. This is Rumspringa, or Rumspringer. So this is a German word, because most of the Amish people's origins were in that kind of Albanian, Germanish-esque region. So essentially this means, this is a term that they use to describe a period of adolescence for some members of the Amish community during which a youth temporarily leaves the community to experience life in the outside world. So essentially, when they get a certain age, when they're 16 ish, or sometimes 18, depending on the let's say young adult, because little Amish sects have different timing, but anyway, that's irrelevant. So essentially they'll leave there because they've only grown up in that Amish community. What they'll do is when they hit that certain kind of mature coming of age, 16, 17, 18, they will leave the community to experience life outside of the Amish culture for a bit, and they call that the Rumspringer. I guess if we look at a Western culture and compare it, it's kind of similar to schoolies, except very different, obviously, but the idea that you hit a certain mature age and then you go off and experience the world outside of your family and everything that you've ever known before. You're kind of out on your own and then you come back. The second one is the Ordnang, which is essentially the German word for discipline and rules. And what the Ordnang is that it sets the rules for Amish living. Now, because they don't have a central church government, each assembly, so each Amish community, in other words, is autonomous and is its own governing authority. Now, autonomous, or the word autonomy, is a really good one to use in essays, etc. If you are autonomous or autonomy, you might want to draw a little arrow above this. This means that you have the ability or capacity to make decisions for yourself, by yourself, if that makes sense. So you are empowered to be able to make decisions for you. If you're autonomous, say when you guys turn 18, legally you become autonomous. You have the authority and power to make decisions for yourself. And so, because they don't have a central government, and that each Amish community is autonomous, every local church has its own individual set of rules, and they adhere to their own Ordnung, or their own order. And this varies from district to district. So the guys up here might have different rules to here, might have different rules to there, and so on and so forth. Now, generally speaking, most of them have similar ideologies and values, but little niches about, say, one Amish group might decide to use electricity and another Amish group might not, but they might believe almost similarly to everything else. That's sort of the idea there. And so this is the kind of common features of their order, or their way of living, or their way of life. which is relevant to most Amish communities. They mostly agree on all these things. So, 1. Electricity and telephones are not connected to Amish houses because they are considered worldly. So, their interpretation of their Christian faith is that they shouldn't be attached to worldly items or possessions, and they count electricity among those things. So most Amish communities do not have any electricity. If you know, there's a photo a bit later. See here, this photo of their community. There's no power lines here. All right. They ride by horse and cart, so they don't drive cars. They wash their clothes mostly by hand. All their farm work, they've only got manual tools and manual labour. Even their clothes and everything they make from scratch. So it's a very kind of how we used to live, 400 or 500 years ago, before electricity. Their way of life hasn't changed much there. But those items they consider worldly. And anything that's worldly can be considered a sin or bad and may lead to temptations for other things, and so they avoid it altogether. So that also avoids them of pretty much any other kind of technology, not just electricity. So I mentioned things like cars, so any petrol running machines, any petrol running farming machines that they could use, they don't. They don't own cars. As I said, they get everywhere by horse and cart, like old mate here. Giddy up, son. And that's their horn draws buggies that I was talking about there, which kind of looks fun. I mean, I'd do it. Education is completed up to year 8 in their own schools. So most Amish communities have their own schools with their own teachers and their own curriculums, but it only goes up to approximately 13 or 14, which is our equivalent of year 8, which is why I've written that. And then after that, they're expected to go on and work in the community. So for men, that would probably be things like barn raising and farming, which we'll get to a bit later. And for girls, it's all the domestic, traditional female roles that they employ there, things like washing and cleaning, hemming, sewing, all that sort of stuff. Another common feature of their order is that a breaking of the rules involves a shunning. Now, shunning pretty much means exile. So if you do anything to break the rules consistently, you are shunned from the community or exiled, and you're not allowed back. So can you imagine, I don't know, being 15 and, slipping a phone into your house, you get caught and you're shunned and you get sent out, kicked out of the community, and you got to fend for yourself all of a sudden. So that is, I don't think it would happen very often. But it's definitely something that exists. So that's part of their common order as well. And then the common thing is after 16 Amish children, so after the age of 16 is mostly, some do it a bit later, 17, 18, but I think it's that coming at age 16. Amish children can experience what they call Rumspringa. And again, we said that's life outside the community for a few years or a few months, depending again on the group. And essentially what this is to do is to decide if they wish to become fully baptized members of their community. So the idea is that they're given a chance to experience a life outside of their community, and if they really like it, it's their choice and they can leave the Amish community and culture. But once they leave, they can never come back. So it's like a big decision they got to make there. Approximately 90% decide to come back and live in the Amish culture, which I guess makes sense, because that's what they've grown up with, that's all they know, their family's there, etc. And otherwise you are you're out and you don't come back in. So that's interesting there. What we've got here is some Amish rules as well. So number 1 for school is come in and sit down immediately. You guys do that, which is good. Do not use bad or unclean language. Can't say that for some of you. Help along with the singing. That's always good. Love a bit of singing in my classroom. Do not play on the outhouse roof during recess. That's very specific. I don't think we have a specific rule at BWSC that says don't play on the roof, but I guess it's probably not advisable or allowed anyway. 5 is to be humble and not openly correct the teacher of any mistakes at all. I want you guys to correct me if I ever make a mistake, because that's how we grow. But again, that's interesting rules, right? Do not write on books or school property. Do not leave school grounds without permission. That's a big one. And be truthful, honest, and respectful at all times. Lovely. So most of those rules aren't too different from us. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting. What I've got here, you may have to turn your head to the side a little bit, or your booklet to the side. But here is all different affiliations or communities of Amish people. And essentially what it is I said how some things are different between cultures and what they use, and technology is always a big key point with them. So what this represents are the percentage of Amish people that use certain technologies, and then it's yes or no whether these specific ones do. So if we look at the bottom, the Amish people in Iowa are probably, I guess you could say, the most progressive in terms of their technology use, and the guys in Swanson or Nebraska aren't very good with technology. So only 6% of Amish people use tractors for their field work. Only 20% use a lawnmower. Like, can you imagine using one of those manual lawnmowers that you gotta like push with the little blades? You might not even know what that is. Only 40% of them have a fridge. Can you imagine not having a fridge? That would be very difficult. Only 70% have an inside flush toilet. So if you live in Nebraska, toilets are considered technology. You got to go to the outhouse and clean that bad boy up yourself, or do a nature dump. Running water bathtub, so even showers and running hot water, only 70% of them have that technology. So say most of them here do, but again, there's those that don't. So you'd have to get a cold bucket, scrub yourself down every day. Almost all of them use washing machines. There's only one group that doesn't. That's the Swiss or Adams. So most of them, because I think washing clothes by hand, I don't know if anyone's tried it. I did once, and it just takes so long. You would spend like 2 hours a day just washing clothes every single day, if you had to do that. And yeah, so I guess you could go through the rest of them there. Most of them are to do with farming tools. But yeah, it's quite interesting just to note the types of technology they do and don't accept. So all of them reject cars, for example, would be one that they absolutely completely reject. Things like, even other things like aircon, heaters, computers, the internet, they would have no idea what any of that is. So to finish off and cap off this lesson, this is your first critical reading you've ever had. Now we're going to do a few more of these in year 12, but essentially I will give you a handout. I'll upload it to Classroom, but I'll also give you a copy on Monday, a physical copy, because you might like it. And what I want you to, so what the reading is on is just Amish people and their culture in general. It goes into a bit more detail than what I have here, and it looks like this. So it's kind of like a few FAQs from the Lancaster Amish people. So they have created a website, so they're using computers and the internet here. Some of them are considered like tourist attractions as well, so these guys are one of them, and they've just written a bit of an FAQ of a few questions that people ask them, you know, like why do they have beards but not moustaches? So why is it that they grow the chin strap here but they cut all around there? And they've quoted a Bible verse here. You know, what language do we speak? Why do we wear those hats? Do you still milk cows by hand? Etc., etc. Do you use medicine and doctors? So all those kind of tricky questions are all there. So read through that once, absorb the information like a sponge, and then on your second read through, what I want you to do is find examples of the following concepts and see if you can highlight them in different colours. So you might say, any example of conflict or cooperation I'll do in this colour, anytime there's technology mentioned, or anytime there's continuity and change. I will highlight in that color. The reason I want those key ones done is because one, practicing for the HSC, we've got to apply concepts to absolutely everything we do, but also the idea that later on we're going to be applying this concept in particular, continuity and change as well. So yeah, once you have done that, you have a summary task. I want you just to write half a page based on your reading on who the Amish people are. So this lesson, I don't want you to worry about summarizing this because you've got the concept cards that you have to do there. Don't worry about writing any summaries on that, and don't worry about writing any summaries on that. Okay, I just want you, just for this lesson, just to do that summary task there. Okay, half a page on the reading based on who the Amish people are. If you want to use some information that you found above here because you found that a bit easier, that's fine, but half a page summary describing the Amish people and their culture. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.